I think it's a good cause, an area that is affecting half the people in the world are potentially at risk for this kind of injuries, women, and the conversation from basic science research where I've worked, which focused exclusively on male rats for many years, to the clinical side of things where the focus has always been on male-dominated sports. I've met a number of very tough female ice hockey players I didn't even know existed. But I think it's important that we try to move the field forward for everybody. All of that rat work was all male rats, and the justification was, traumatic brain injury as a 2 or 3 to 1 ratio, male to female, so it makes sense to just do male rats, and there were other excuses not to do female rats. Well, that's why Dr. Greco's here, because she's doing those experiments with the female rats and the female young rats. Each layer of complexity that you add makes the experiments more difficult. It's not that you can just say, okay, we're doing a study with male rats, now we're going to add female rats, it's twice as many, right? Because you have to have then what ages you're going to look at. Things change with age. Are you going to have them normally cycling, or how are you going to? And then we heard today people talk, Dr. Ragapathy talking about, not just where are they in their hormonal cycle at the time of injury, but where are they at the time that they're being evaluated. And all of a sudden, what seems like a simple amendment to an experiment becomes a completely different experiment. Well, and it's great that there's a call for research that involves females, and including all the way to the NIH. But the flip side is that there needs to be a realization that this isn't just, you can tack it on as an extra study. You really need to design the proper studies with the proper controls, and to do that, there has to be the right funding. A comment was brought up at Pink One by Margot Patukian, who just raised the possibility that part of the confound that we have in evaluating female recovery, with the argument that it takes longer for females to recover, is based on return to play that's determined by sort of subjective criteria, often in male-dominated medical specialties, or at least at the time. And I hadn't really thought about that before, but it just goes to show how pervasive, this male-centric approach to, particularly with sports-related injuries, and why it's important to think about subtle things like that. That's a subtle bias that can get in and can contaminate any study that has recovery from, injury, that doesn't sort of take into account that there might be, some implicit bias, if you will, in the way that we approach how we take care of girls or women compared to how we take care of boys or men. It's always a great breadth of things that are covered here at the meeting. I think the real challenge is what I tried to throw out in my last comments, is that I've seen sports concussions do this, I've seen pediatric head injuries do this, little groups, everybody's doing their own thing, they've got their own pet project, which is great. People are passionate about those things. They find little findings that may or may not be generalizable, and you can do that for a while. But ultimately what you need to do is you need to get everybody on the same page and agree, or have a group of people agree, we think this is the important question and here's what we need to do to answer it. And that may require getting 1,000 concussions into a database with everybody scoring them and diagnosing them in similar criteria, and everybody using similar return to activity criteria. And then maybe we can answer, some of those questions about where's the sweet spot for recovery and is it different between males and females. But if everybody's doing their own little study, we'll move forward incrementally. But you've seen, the other fields struggling with that stuff too. Yeah. I think it's just important to, and I try to emphasize this in all my comments, is that, I don't have a horse in the race except to find what the truth is. And that means that sometimes I'm wrong. And that means that I have to be very careful when I'm either talking about something or I'm observing something, or particularly if I'm experimenting and trying to figure something out, that I don't let my own bias, color my interpretation or even the way that I'm studying a particular thing. And it's human nature. We're all prone to that. And I think, again, the field generates a lot of passion, a lot of strong feelings, and we need to try to come together. I think we try to be objective, but the real balancing is if everybody's in the room talking to each other and where they represent these different views, you'll keep that middle ground. You know, if we just turn into reds and blues and shout at each other, you know, a concussion is a brain movement injury. Okay, and so the brain and the head move suddenly, accelerate or decelerate, and that causes dysfunction in the brain. I tell patients it's not a hole in the brain, it's not blood in the brain, but the brain doesn't work well. It can recover in time if we do the right things. There are several different potential dangers from having multiple concussions. I think the greatest danger is from having multiple concussions in close proximity to each other. So if you have a concussion before you've recovered from the previous concussion, then quite often it's easier to get that second concussion, and when you get that second concussion, the symptoms and the consequences can be more severe. There's also concern that if you have several concussions without full recovery, that may start processes that go on and lead to longer-term problems. That's an area that we still need to do more work. I mean, I think this is a real challenge. There's risk in everything, and you don't want to unknowingly take on risks that's going to lead to, you know, long-term permanent problems. But you want to balance that with what we don't know and what the potential benefits are. You know, so there's a lot of benefits to sports participation and to an active lifestyle. And we know that your cognitive health in the long term is determined to a large extent by the physical activity that you have during your adult years, and that the physical activity you have in your adult years is really set in place by the physical activity you do when you're growing up. So I think we want to avoid frightening people into becoming couch potatoes or sitting on the couch and just playing video games. We want them to get out and play real sports, but we want them to do it with full knowledge of what the risks are, with protective equipment that mitigates those risks, with people who are supervising to help make sure that they stay as safe as possible, and that we have referees and officials who are present to properly enforce the rules and prevent unnecessary risks in the sport. So we want people to play safe and play smart.